I will start off by, of course, calling the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 7 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the House on May 26, 2020, the committee commenced its study on the impacts of COVID-19 on fishing industry stakeholders. Today's meeting, of course, is taking place by video conference for the most part. The proceedings are public and will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entire committee. To ensure an orderly first virtual meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. Interpretation in this video conference will work very much like a regular committee meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. As you are speaking, if you plan to alternate from one language to the other, you will need to also switch the interpretation channel so it aligns with the language you are speaking. You may want to allow for a short pause when switching languages. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you are ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. If a member wishes to intervene for the usual committee business or on a point of order that has been raised by another member, I encourage him or her to use the raise hand function. In order to do so, you should click on participants at the bottom of the screen. When the list pops up, you will see next to your name that you can click raise hand. That will signal to the chair, to me, your interest to speak, and will keep the names in a chronological order. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. I might be guilty of going a bit too fast myself at times. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute because we get the background noise being fed through. The use of headsets is strongly encouraged. Should any technical challenge arise, for example, in relation to interpretation or a problem with your audio arises, please advise the chair immediately and the technical team will work to resolve them. Please note that we may need to suspend during these times as we need to ensure all members are able to participate fully. Before we get started, can everyone click on their screen in the top right-hand corner and ensure that they are on gallery view? With this view, you should be able to see all the participants in the grid view. It will ensure that all video participants can see one another. Finally, I would like to mention that contrary to the regular on-site meeting, we do not need to suspend after we hear the witnesses and go to committee business still in public. We can just wait a few seconds for the witnesses to click and leave the Zoom meeting, and we are good to continue the meeting without a suspension. I would now like to, of course, introduce our witnesses that we have before us virtually today. From the Canadian Coast Guard, Mr. Chris Henderson, Deputy Commissioner of Operations. From Department of Fisheries and Oceans, Jean-Guy Forgeron, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Strategic Policy. Dominique Lepore, Assistant Deputy Minister, Human Resources and Corporate Services. Sylvie Lapointe, Assistant Deputy Minister, Fisheries and Harbour Management. And Jane O'Donoghue, Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Financial Officer. Mr. Forgeron, I believe you're going to start to speak for the group, and you'll have 6 minutes. And I will remind everybody, both the speakers and the questioners, I will be very strict on the time. So please take note. I'll cut in if you're going over time. So when you're ready, sir, please start.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning. My name is Jean-Guy Forgeron. I'm the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of Fisheries Oceans Canada. I'm responsible for the Department's Strategic Policy sector, which covers economics, Indigenous and sectoral policy, international and intergovernmental affairs, and communications functions. Today, I am accompanied by Jen O'Donoghue, our Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Financial Officer, Sylvie Lapointe, Assistant Deputy Minister of Fisheries and Harbour Management, Chris Henderson, Deputy Commissioner of Operations, Canadian Coast Guard, and Dominique Lapointe, Assistant Deputy Minister, Human Resources and Corporate Services. Thank you for the invitation to be here to discuss the impacts of COVID-19 on Canada's fishing sector.
Mr. Chair, point of order, please.
Yes, Mr. Hardy.
Okay. Sorry to intervene, but the telephone connection for staff is not working. and they've just given us a heads up that they're unable to hear the proceedings.
Okay. Technical services, is there anything can we suspend for just a moment to see what's going on? Thank you.
Should I continue, Mr. Chair?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
please.
Following my opening remarks, we will be happy to answer any of your questions. During these unprecedented and challenging times, DFO remains very much at the forefront in managing Canada's fisheries and protecting the marine environment. While the Coast Guard continues to deliver search and rescue services, ice-breaking operations, maritime security, and environmental response. Health and safety remain our highest priority at DFO. Those who work in Canada's fisheries, on board Coast Guard vessels, or in our operational centres are doing an essential service for Canadians during this critical time. Our fish and seafood sector is essential to Canada's economy and food security. In 2018, our commercial sea fisheries landed almost 800,000 tons of fish and seafood, valued at $3.7 billion. However, significant losses are expected across the sector over the coming months as summer fisheries begin. These losses are primarily related to depressed prices at the wharf and are a reflection of the changing demand. Restrictions to combat the spread of COVID-19 have also resulted in shifts from food service to retail, from fresh to canned, dry, or frozen products, and from in-store grocery to online shopping. While the Government of Canada has delivered economic measures to help individual Canadians and businesses get through the pandemic through the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, the Canada Emergency Business Account, and a number of other tax credit and measures, DFO is working to support the fish and seafood industry adapt to this new reality. Over the past several months, the Minister of Fisheries, Oceans, and the Canadian Coast Guard and DFO officials have been engaging with harvesters, aquaculture producers, processors, Indigenous partners, and the provinces and territories. What we heard is that while the fish and seafood sector is experiencing virtually the same pressures as other parts of the economy, the impacts are somewhat unique. For example, there is an accumulation of perishable inventory due to reduced demand for fish and seafood products that are normally marketed to the food service industry. Additionally, products typically sold fresh are being diverted to processing plants. And this is resulting in concerns over processing capacity, especially in light of the physical distancing requirements and other measures that will be required to ensure the safety of workers. We also heard from the self-employed harvesters that their particular circumstances as small, seasonal businesses without waged employees have made it difficult for them to access the wage subsidies and interest-free loans available under the government's broad-based programs. These discussions have led to a $500 million targeted investment in the fish and seafood sector to ensure that fish harvesters and processors get the support they need to adapt to the current situation. Our goal is to continue to ensure the integrity of Canada's food security while positioning these sectors for a strong recovery. This investment includes $469 million in funding to establish the new Fish Harvester Benefit and Fish Harvester Grant. Fish Harvester Benefit will provide up to $267 million in income support for those who cannot access the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and who experience losses of 25% or more in 2020. The Fish Harvester Grant has dedicated funding of up to $201 million in non-repayable support to those who cannot access the Canada Emergency Business Account. These funds can be used to cover the costs of running a fishing business, including increases in costs due to health and safety requirements. In addition, given that earnings may not be enough to allow independent harvesters to claim employment insurance this year, the government is working to ensure that self-employed fish harvesters and sharepersons will be able to file an EI claim based on previous year's insurable earnings. This support also includes the $62.5 million Canadian Seafood Stabilization Fund, which will allow the fish and seafood processing sector to increase storage capacity, continue to purchase from harvesters, innovate to meet new market demands, and comply with new health and safety measures. Businesses in the fish and seafood processing sector and the organizations that support them.
Monsieur le Président,
Yes.
j'aurais un point d'ordre.
Point of order.
I
have a point of order. Employees are telling me that the floor line is not working right now.
Yes, we have a point of order that a floor line is not working. Can we get that checked on, Nancy?
Absolutely. I am on it already now.
Okay.
Point of privilege, Mr. Chair, also, please.
Yes, Mr. Cormier.
Maybe we should ask the staff to just hang up and call back in. Maybe someone just dial, the wrong like PIN number or something like that. It happened maybe before, so maybe we can ask everybody to hang up on the staff side and then recall to see if it's working, because it seems not the issue seems not to be resolved since we try for the last 30 minutes. So.
I'll ask Nancy to check with the technical people. So again, we'll have to suspend for a moment to get that rectified.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We will do that. We're on it at the moment, and I will make sure to mute everybody during that time.
Chair, then I'll conclude by saying DFO will continue to work with its partners and stakeholders to build on this important work accomplished to date and to support our vital fish and seafood industries. And I welcome the questions of the committee, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that, and thank you for your patience. And I want to say a big thank you to the technical staff as well that's been trying to straighten out these issues for us as we try and get through this meeting today. So we'll start our questioning, and as I said earlier, I'll try and be very tight on the time limits. So we'll start, of course, with the first round for 6 minutes or less. Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today, and I want to recognize the work that DFO and the Coast Guard have gone through to manage to try and get through this COVID situation, help our harvesters, processors through this situation. My first question, I guess, would be for Mr. Henderson with the Coast Guard. Has the Canadian Coast Guard provided guidance for personnel safety on board their vessels in respect to the COVID-19 situation?
Thank you very much for the question. And Mr. Chair, very happy to advise that absolutely we have detailed extensive guidance for our personnel on all vessels and in shore bases and installations. There are detailed screening procedures. Either a rescue specialist or a delegate from the ship's commanding officer will screen everybody coming on board our ships, and will ask folks who are exhibiting symptoms of COVID not to enter the ship or the facility and go and get tested. We have extensive standard operating procedures for everything from extensive cleaning of vessels if there's a suspected contamination, to how to don and use personal protective equipment appropriately. Engaged.
Would there be protocols for all size vessels within the Coast Guard?
Yes, sir, there would be.
Okay, thank you. When was this guidance provided?
The guidance has been developed. We started developing the guidance in February as we saw COVID coming towards us. After mid-March, when the lockdown happened, we started to publish the guidance on our intranet page, which is internal to the Coast Guard and DFO. But in the context of many of our crew members not being on off-cycle, not having access to the departmental system, we published it on the intranet. So we have been maintaining it ever since the middle of March, developing and maintaining it since the middle of March.
Okay, thank you. And what federal government entities or departments contributed to the producing the guidelines and protocols?
We've worked extensively with the Public Health Agency of Canada, with Transport Canada, and with Health Canada. And we worked closely with Public Safety Canada because through the Government Operations Center, they're coordinating a lot of the federal response. So we would seek input from our federal partners. We also consulted extensively with our bargaining agents within the Coast Guard and DFO to make sure that labor was comfortable with what we were coming up with.
Thank you. Next would be on to Mr. Fergeron. When did DFO begin developing the Canadian Food Stabilization Fund?
I can't remember the exact date, but when it became very clear that there was a drop in demand for seafood products, as witnessed by prices at the wharf, that there would have to be, in the case of the stabilization fund, there might be one of the things that we want to make sure that happened was that processors were in the best position possible to continue to receive seafood from harvesters. And we started engagement early on in March, I would say, or perhaps it would be March, with our regional agency colleagues to assess what would be required to help the processors, both whether it as a subsector of our sector, but in particular to be in well positioned to continue to take fish from our harvesting community for their benefit. So I would say it was sometime in early March, but I don't know the exact date. Late March, excuse me.
See, I was muted by the chair. I hope I'm back online and that I have time left. What seafood processing organizations and operators were consulted in developing the Seafood Stabilization Fund?
So we have ongoing consultations with members of the industry, for instance, Fisheries Council of Canada, Canadian Association, Aquaculture Industry Association, on an ongoing basis, both bilaterally and multilaterally, on what the different segments of the industry were required to address what's going on during this.
Un appel au règlement.
Call to order, please.
Le Président,
Sorry, Mr. Chair, we lost a lot of time, but because of the bad quality of the sound, the interpretation since almost the beginning of Mr. Forgeron's intervention has been lost. I'm sorry to waste that time, but I wish we could have an interpretation so that we can participate at the best of our possibilities.
Nancy, can you check with interpretation to see if everything is working okay?
Yes, I will.
Okay, we'll suspend for a moment. Mr. Arnold?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try and make the best use of the time I can. Back to Mr. Forgeron. Why were Ontario, Nunavut, the Yukon, and Northwest Territories excluded from the Seafood Stabilization Fund?
Whether or not they're going to be excluded from the fund is yet to be determined, Mr. Chair. Basically, the initial thought on the fund was to address pressures in the coastal fisheries that were federally regulated. And as we've announced the program and rolled it out, we see that there is probably demand for assistance of a similar nature in other jurisdictions other than the 4 Atlantic provinces, Quebec and British Columbia. We are working with the regional agencies to determine whether that would be best served through the Stabilization Fund or through other regional development agency programming that is being rolled out currently, like the regional relief and recovery funds of those organizations to address the freshwater processing industry sector requirements in that area. And when we announce the details and roll out the programming for the Stabilization Fund, it'll be clear in which of these 2 funds the freshwater processing sector will be addressed through.
Thank you, Mr. Forgeron, and thank you, Mr. Arnold. We'll now move on to Mr. Batiste for 6 minutes or less, please. You're on mute, and your time is clicking.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? So I've been speaking to fishermen daily in Cape Breton, and our lobster harvesters are facing substantially reduced demand due to COVID-19. I've seen photos of literally piles of lobster that just won't be sold and will probably be wasted. Prices have dropped to about $4.25, the lowest we've seen in a generation per pound, and the market has been so weak that there have been quotas on the haul. So I'd like to get a sense of DFO's line of sight on this issue. I'd also like to get a sense of whether or not the government intervention is being considered. We announced a food surplus purchase program. Is that something that we might leverage? This seems like exactly the sort of situation where a food surplus purchase program could play a role. And I'd just like to get you to comment on that.
Mr. Forgeron?
So what we're definitely seeing, Mr. Chair, is really depressed prices at the wharf due to a decrease in demand for product, and particularly lobster is one of those products. The price for lobster in the first quarter, where we have the statistics in, were maintained strong. Last year's prices were particularly high, were record prices, and we're receiving reports similar to the honourable member has heard about a reduction of up to 40% in the price from the high to where it is right now. What we're hoping to see is an increase in demand for this product in the short term, and we're seeing the recovery of some of the markets already. The Lobster Council has told us that, for instance, the Chinese market is now up to 50% of where it normally would be at this time of year, after being much lower than that in the previous few months, and that will actually help with that particular problem of too much lobster coming in at the wharf. A lot of the relationship is managed between the processors and the buyers and the harvesters, and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans does not directly interfere in that as the fisheries regulator. I would also like to mention that one of the things the government has done to help address this is through the stabilization fund that we were talking about under the previous question, was to do things such as fund possible increases in the processors to move from the live processing of live lobster market to a more processed lobster market, increase storage and cold storage for lobster, for instance, and help them retool to actually meet the new demand shifts created for seafood away from the live market to a more processed market. As to the question regarding the surplus food purchase program, in fact, fish and seafood are eligible under that program. That program is going to be administered by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, but fish and seafood is going to be a part of that program, and there may be opportunity for either what's being harvested by the harvesting community or for the aquaculture industry to avail itself of that program. The details of that program aren't out yet and are currently under development by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, but they're doing so in consultation with Fisheries and Oceans Canada to ensure that our sector is appropriately represented and eligible under that program.
Thank you for that. I'm glad you mentioned the storage facilities. I was on the phone this morning with one of the storage facilities and trying to find remedies to. No one wants to see crates of dead lobsters that could be feeding people, especially in some of these communities that have food insecurity. I'm wondering, is there any plan for us to increase storage capability or capacity in the short term? Is that something that we're looking at as well?
I believe that is going to be one of the key pillars of the Canadian Seafood Stabilization Fund, which will be administered by the regional agencies. One of the primary pillars of that program that was announced by the government is actually to increase storage, and the desire is to increase the storage in the short term so as to continue to have a market and buyers for the goods of the harvesters and have that lobster come off the wharf and into storage, into processors and buyers, so that they can increase inventory and continue to process that fish and seafood, which also should have the long-term benefit of more storage and processing capability for when we hit the recovery period. But the hope is to move very quickly through the regional agencies to get that storage capacity up so that there's some ability for the purchasers and the processors to buy that stock as fast as possible.
And I know I won't have a chance to get an answer on this question because I'm running short on time, but I wanted to just speak to a little bit about the communication, get a sense of something written. How can DFO help these fishermen who are looking for help, that don't understand the programs, that have heard, that we've put almost $500 million into the fishing industry, but they don't know how this works out? Is there any way DFO can figure out how to communicate effectively with these fishermen in these areas that may not have the greatest internet capabilities? And I hope you have a plan for that. And I know you can't answer that because we're at time, but if you could for sure look at how we are doing for communications and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Batiste. We'll now go to the block of Madame Gill for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question that's linked to the $62.5 million assistance that's being offered to the sector about storage capacity, because this affects prices short-term and long-term. So I'm wondering if this is something that you have evaluated, because, of course, it doesn't give harvesters more money just because we're putting their stuff in a storage facility.
The volet of course, cold storage facilities under the Canadian Seafood Stabilization Fund is to allow the processors to continue to buy the harvester's product over the long run. And what happens is if processors and buyers find themselves in a situation in which they cannot either store or send on to the buyers because of lack of demand, what we're seeing already is that they start regulating how much seafood they're willing to purchase from the harvesting community. And we're seeing that in certain fisheries at the moment, that because they're concerned about their inability to store seafood and fish, that they're actually putting limits on individual harvesters on how much they'll buy from those harvesters, as opposed to what we've seen in the past where they bought all the product available. We believe if we increase the storage capacity of these processors, that'll mitigate against that kind of requirement on the part of processors and buyers to limit the amount they'll buy from the harvester community.
je pense que c'est
Well, I think it is a minimum, and maybe it's really good for those who can store, but for the fish harvesters, it can only mitigate. Well, some of them, as we know, they are going to have a lot of losses for the season. And I'm thinking about the grants that have been offered by the government, and I was wondering, I'd like to ask a question. Why were there differences between the support that is provided to fisheries as compared to the support provided in other sectors? And I speak with a lot of fish harvesters from the east of Quebec, and generally speaking, they really see a big difference in terms of benefits and subsidies. They have the feeling that their program is a lot cheaper or has less money for them.
So the objective of the government is to establish a program as a national application, which would be of benefit to all sectors across the economy. Initiatives such as the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy are examples of such things. And as they rolled out, we have made changes to them to try to capture differences in sectors from times. And I will take the example of the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. We saw very quickly that this was an issue for our sector because the seasonality of the sector and its impact on seasonal workers, especially those who are coming off EI. And the government made an adjustment to that so that workers coming off EI, which was a lot of that was happening in our seafood sector, both in the processors and the harvesters, that they would be eligible. We noticed immediately after that change did not catch those individuals who were on Fisheries EI, which is not regular EI. And within a number of days, we made a change to make those individuals eligible for the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. Having said that, there are times we have realized, and this was through our ongoing consultations with the industry, with their union representatives and with the harvesters associations, our ongoing consultations with our provincial counterparts, both at the officials and the ministerial level, that a lot of the harvesting community was not finding itself eligible for these benefits. They technically can apply and be eligible because of structure of the industry or their enterprises. Some are eligible and some are not. And we thought, and so we thought,
Est-ce que je pourrais poursuivre?
I think, yes, well, I think my 5 minutes are going to run very fast. So I have some other question for you, Mr. Forgeron. You have mentioned IE, but there are several workers in the sector who will not have access. You have spoken about seasonality. Well, for some communities, this is what really support the whole communities. A very poor fishery season has a major impact. So do you have any discussion concerning the idea of providing maybe an income until the next season? So an income for the whole year until the next season, bearing in mind the major impact because there is really a lot less demand. So how can we make sure that our workers for all the seasonal industry, that they can have some income support to go until the 2021 season?
Answer that question in two parts, and I'll try to be very quick. Seeing gaps in our sector, especially gaps regarding the fish harvesters and share persons who are organized in a very different way than the normal economy, we actually did the grant and benefit program to address those gaps that we found in the Canada Emergency Response Benefit and Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy directly. And those individuals have choices between either the national program or the sectoral specific program. Prime Minister also announced that in the case of employment insurance, those who were, say, Fisheries EI, that they could expect to receive Fisheries EI either based on benefits that they would be entitled to from this year's fishing, or in short order that they could be secure and understand what they might be entitled to based on previous year's earnings because of the expectation and loss in earnings. So that has been done for Fisheries EI, which has been a small subcategory of the seasonal workers in our sector. The wage earning sector, which we find in the processing.
Sorry, Mr. Forgeron, I have to cut you off. We're going way over time. Mr.
Est-ce que ce serait possible d'avoir la réponse par...
Could I get the answer in a written form, please? Is it possible to get the written answer to my question? Yes.
Now to Mr. Johns for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to all the staff at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and Canadian Coast Guard for the work that you're doing in light of the difficult circumstances that you're working under. My first question is actually back to Mr. Batiste. He was talking about the food procurement plan. My colleague Alistair McGregor and I wrote a letter on April 24th calling on the government for a Canada food procurement strategy and plan and investment. And we heard the Prime Minister on May 5th announce the $50 million plan. We've been asking for days to see if seafood would be included in that plan. Today's the first day that we got confirmation that that is actually happening. $50 million doesn't go very far when we're looking at agriculture and seafood. Will you be increasing it now that you know that we know that seafood's going to be included? And when will you be opening up that program so we can understand the details?
The program as originally announced had included in it both the agriculture, agri-food sector, as well as the fish and seafood sector. So the $50 million always envisioned both sides of the food community. Whether or not there will be a plan after the program rolls out, and I do not know when the program rolls out. It's being administered by our colleagues at Agriculture, Agri-Food Canada.
Okay. My concern is that my concern, sir, and sorry I have to be short because I have 6 minutes only, is that time's running out. Like these fishers are out fishing. They don't have market to ship to. In the United States and Alaska, for example, they buy their salmon when prices drop. They serve it to the United States military, to United States penitentiaries and government operations. I hope that you'll be considering doing just that. My second thing is you've rolled out these programs around the Harvesters Grant and Fish Harvester Benefit. When will this money actually land in the hands of fishers?
So we hope to be announcing the details of these programs in the not too distant future. We are working with our colleagues at ESDC to develop the programming for these initiatives. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans historically doesn't deliver these type of programs. So we're working with our colleagues over there. We hope to be rolling them out over the course of the summer months.
So my concern is with that, sir, is that fishers need money now, and they can't access a lot of them the CEBA program or any of the financial supports, the Canadian wage subsidy. They're going into season. They don't have these supports in place. I'm asking also about they've requested that license fees be waived and moorage fees be waived, especially boats that don't want to go out and fish. This could help support conservation. I know on the North Coast in the Pacific, for example, a lot of First Nations own licenses. They'd prefer not to go fishing, but they're going to have to be able to afford to pay for those licenses. Is this something the government's considering, waiving those fees?
At this point in time, there's no plan to waive license fees, fishing license fees. And I believe in the case of mooring fees at small craft harbors, those are applied by the small craft harbor authorities, not by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. Okay. Is that correct, Sylvie?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so we're asking that the government consider waiving license fees for these fishers and for conservation reasons, but also to help these fishers get through for next season. Also, the next question is, what are you doing for sport fishers, recreation fishers? A lot of them are making a living relying on tourism. They're not showing up. The CEBA loans, the various different programs the government's rolling out, many of them can't access these programs, or it's not even close to enough. What is the government doing to look at that sector in particular to help support those fishers? Will they be applying the same EI program based on 2019, for example, into 2021, like they are with the commercial fleet?
When it comes to what we're doing for the EI system for the commercial fleet, that is actually limited to those who are actually participate in the fishers benefits of the EI system, which are the owner operators and the share persons. It actually doesn't apply to the
So will you be applying something similar to the sports sector because they are in a different category? Will you be doing something specific for the sports sector?
And what I believe what will be happening is they'll be considered as a part of how the government's approach will be to seasonal workers and their treatment under the national regular EI system, which is a responsibility of ESDC and the Department of Finance policy-wise. And Fisheries and Oceans is not involved in that directly in that discussion.
In the COVID-19 era, how has foreign ownership of licenses, quota, and processing impacted fisheries operations in the Pacific?
I'm not aware of any impacts regarding to foreign ownership in the Pacific. Sylvie, do you have any other knowledge of any possible impacts that might have happened?
I've certainly not heard from any of the industry on the West Coast that that's happened.
So the concern is we know that you don't track foreign ownership on the West Coast. And has the government looked at ensuring that there's a fair split for those that are leasing quota, like a 50-50 split? Because we know people have, committed to, leasing prices based on last year's market price, and before they even leave the dock, they're going bankrupt before they even untie their boats. Is this something that you're looking at intervening while you're responding to the sharing risks and benefits, and how you're going to hopefully implement that plan that was put forward by this committee?
So the department is starting to look at the issue of foreign ownership as a result of the considerations of this committee. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans has no actual position on foreign ownership, and as we can see by the different treatment of foreign ownership in the Pacific and the two different ways we treat foreign ownership between the different Atlantic fleets. So we have decided to undertake some research into the issue of foreign ownership and beneficial ownership of fishing licenses in Canada as a result.
During COVID-19, we're seeing the impact of that. It's serious to those fishers. It's harming those fishers and those communities.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. Your time is up. We'll now go to the second round, and we'll start with Mr. Bragdon for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my first question will go to Mr. Forgeron, I believe, and just in regards to, has the DFO, the strategic policy, see the necessity of the government support increase the availability of Canadian fish and seafood to Canadians and to build demand in our domestic markets? Is there any strategy underway for that?
The industry stakeholders have raised the need to actually target the domestic market a little bit more than they have in the past. As you would all be aware as members of this committee, that we're a very export-oriented industry. And our provincial colleagues have also raised that, and we are discussing the possibility of whether or not we would want to collectively launch in partnership with our provincial counterparts and the industry something in the more domestic area of marketing as opposed to our traditional export marketing efforts.
Okay, and another question along the same lines, does DFO's strategic policy see the necessity for governments to reconnect our fish and seafood exports with overseas markets as a result of what's been happening? Has there been efforts and outreach to those areas along with the domestic market? And has these needs for increased domestic as well as foreign areas or purchasers or markets, has those efforts and the need for expanding those efforts and communicating with them been communicated to the minister as well?
The department hasn't undertaken any new expanded marketing efforts during this period of time. What we have been seeing is an increase in market demand slowly returning as things become normalized. And we're now seeing that a bit in the Asian markets, which of course were the first markets hit by COVID. But we haven't determined whether we need any long-term plans to target those markets beyond letting them recover at this point in time.
Thank you. And when, in regards to EI changes that are basically in the works or needing to be perhaps looked at, when can self-employed fish harvesters and sharepersons expect to receive the details of the EI changes the government said it would be proposing? Will the EI changes be proposed in legislation? Do you know?
I do not know the detailed answers to those questions because that falls under my colleagues at ESDC, but these are questions that we are receiving both from the industry and our provincial counterparts as well, as most recently as from the provinces this morning. On topic, sir.
Yeah, it's pretty current and relevant, I'm sure. And basically, is there something that DFO is doing to ensure that whatever proposed changes are coming through EI will actually fit the needs of the fishers themselves? Is there collaboration going on and communication with our frontline harvesters?
The harvesters representatives are discussing with us and asking us questions about both EI and the other programs. We are focused currently on our own current DFO programs, which are going to be delivered by either the regional agencies or ESDC, to ensure that they're easy and understandable for our harvester community to actually apply in an easy, quick way. For instance, in the case of the fish harvesters grant and benefits, we're going to have asked ESDC to even have call center capacity to help our harvester community actually assist them in applying for this stuff. And one of the principles in setting up the program was to keep it as simple as possible and accessible for accessibility purposes.
Okay, and this would be along the lines of that with the fish harbor. Basically, with that, when you realize there's probably some who are falling through the cracks, and there's some unique situations as it pertains to some of the fishers and harvesters, is there, as it relates to the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy Program, are there measures being taken by DFO to address the areas where some may be falling through on this emergency wage subsidy program? Like there are certain situations where some of the harvesters and fishers just maybe don't fit a certain category like others, and there's going to have to be some tweaking or adjustments. Are you aware of any of that taking place right now?
So we don't have any responsibility directly for the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. The fish harvester benefit program was a direct response to the fact that we realized that our owner operators and our sharepersons, who collectively made up the majority of the fishing fleet's crews, were completely falling between the stools, if you will, of eligibility, and that was a direct response to that. And the government has made adjustments over time on the wage subsidy program, including the period of times, which was what we heard was the large issue in the fish harvesting community was it did not match our seasons, though it has now been extended. We do pass on the advocacy efforts of our stakeholders onto our interdepartmental colleagues to ensure that that is a part of their policy deliberations and discussions, though we have no responsibility for those programs.
Thank you, Mr. Bergeron and Mr. Bragdon. We'll now move on to Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses who've toughed it out with us today. I wanted to talk a little bit about not the economic health of our fishers, but their physical health. There's a news report out of Alaska that a fish boat arrived in port with 86 crew members testing positive for the COVID-19. What do we know about the safety protocols in place for the people who are out on the boats?
Occupational health and safety issues in our fishing fleet is actually within provincial jurisdiction, not in federal jurisdiction, and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans has not been involved in that. The different provincial jurisdictions have worked with their harvesting community and with their health organizations to establish guidelines in that regard for their fishing fleets. Our current program or grant program, for instance, that for the harvester benefit would allow for them to have some liquidity in order to implement elements of that plan if they needed liquidity for that. But from a direct guidelines and guidance and regulation of occupational health and safety vis-a-vis COVID-19 in the fishing fleet, that falls under provincial jurisdiction, and with provincial authorities working with labor and their appropriate associations.
Yeah, you can understand that it's pretty close quarters, obviously, on some of these vessels. With respect to that, what would happen if you got a signal from a vessel out at sea where a crew member has come down and is really very gravely ill? Is this something that the Coast Guard is in a position to respond to with the appropriate safety measures in place?
So thank you for that question. The Coast Guard certainly is involved in responding to, reports of mariners that have COVID-like symptoms. It hasn't happened yet, as far as I'm aware, in the fishing context, although it has happened in the commercial shipping context. What happens is our marine communications and traffic services maintain radio communication with the ship's master. We go through a screening procedure with them that is based on Public Health Agency of Canada guidelines. We pass on that information to Public Health Agency. They consult, and working with Transport Canada, will hold that ship either at anchor or offshore until we get an answer as to whether or not we need to be concerned about COVID. If there is, as in one case happened on the East Coast, a ship was, actually in harbor. We liaise with the provincial health authorities to make sure that any crew member is looked after appropriately. And our own crew, are trained in dealing with mariners who might have COVID, so they have the proper personal protective equipment and the procedures and training to be able to deal with a mariner displaying COVID. But as I mentioned, nothing that I'm aware of has occurred so far in the fishing fleet.
Have we had any instances where a ship, a fishing vessel has shown up in a small community, basically unannounced, with a sick crew member on board, and presenting a challenge for that local community to deal with this sick person?
No, sir, not that I'm aware of. We, on the West Coast, we were, in the lead up to the May long weekend, we were particularly concerned about the fine weather, encouraging people to take to the water for recreational purposes, and also that included significant concern about seasonal travelers from the United States who tend to take that waterway up towards Alaska for the summer. And as you can imagine, there are some very small communities, mostly Indigenous communities, that along that route, great places that traditional people stop by. And so we were working hard to discourage people from making that trip. In fact, working with the Canada Border Services Agency, the U.S. Coast Guard, the RCMP, we put out a lot of public communication about that. And in fact, the border closure, which was up until then, by and large, a land border, an airport border, how do I put this? We basically moved it out onto the water to make sure that we were also making sure that people knew that the border on the water is closed as well. But directly to your question, I'm not familiar of that scenario that you've described.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hardy. Your time is up. We'll now go to Mr. Fast for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And it's good to join our colleagues on this committee again. I wanted to first of all follow up on a very important question which Mr. Johns asked. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the role that the communist regime in China has played in that crisis. And it's also highlighted how vulnerable we in Canada are to the loss of our economic sovereignty over our strategic assets and critical supplies. And that concern applies equally to our commercial seafood harvesting and processing industry. Now, you said that the department hasn't taken a position on the foreign ownership of Canadian commercial fishing licenses. I would like to suggest that you do. As you know, the industry committee is undertaking a study on foreign ownership by state-owned enterprises, and I'm confident that Canadians have significant concerns about hostile foreign interests acquiring interests in Canadian companies and strategic industries, including interests in our commercial fishing industry. By the way, I'm glad you're doing some work on this issue, and I would kindly ask that you provide this committee with updates on what your research might reveal. In any event, I'll go to my first question. That is, to what extent has the COVID-19 pandemic taken away from the work that DFO would otherwise be doing? And as part of your answer, could you tell us how many, if any, DFO staff have been redeployed away from their normal duties in order to address COVID-19 related issues? You can use FTEs if you want.
Dominic?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So we've been able to deliver on most of our business line. In terms of staff being impacted by COVID-19, for the entire department, we've got a total of 10 people, 10 staff members that have been impacted. So our staff is still working. We have staff on the field also, staff that was essential to our business line have been doing that. So I have to say that DFO has never been closed for business because of COVID.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you've never been closed for business. As you know, DFO and basically our country has a number of pressing issues within its purview relating to our fisheries, not the least of which is the dramatic decline in Canada's wild Pacific salmon populations. Being from the West Coast, I'm trying to get a sense of whether this work has been compromised or otherwise delayed by COVID-19. For example, the Big Bar slide is an existential threat to the Fraser River wild salmon. So to what extent has that pandemic response negatively impacted progress on the Big Bar remediation project?
Jen?
Yeah, so I can answer that. Mr. Chair. I think in this case, the fact that the Big Bar location is so remote has actually worked in our favor, unlike other things that we've been trying to do out there. And the actual project has continued despite the pandemic. And Kiewit has done an excellent job to make sure that the health and safety of workers has been maintained throughout the process.
Just to follow up on that, the costs of that project have more than tripled over original estimates. Are you aware whether the work of the contractor on the Big Bar slide has been compromised by the pandemic?
So in terms of the cost, as you know, we presented to the back in March, anticipated to spend approximately $45 million by the May timeframe on Big Bar. And we've actually stayed very close to within that range. The contractor themselves relate to safety and security at the site, and us wanting to use the expertise of Kiewit to continue the work on some of the contingency measures that we've put in place.
Can you provide us with assurances that Peter Kiewit and Sons are going to be able to do that work safely? As you know, they're subject to a criminal prosecution right now, and there has been a smaller slide there which could have injured workers on the site. Are you able to provide us with assurances that this work is going to be done safely?
So the project is monitored very closely by ourselves and our partners at PSPC, and we continue to make sure all of the safety measures are in place and monitor it very closely.
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have?
You're out, sir.
Okay.
A little bit over, actually. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. To people answering. Before I go on to the next questioner, I just wanted to ask committee permission if we could extend for a bit for the time we lost. I'm estimating approximately half an hour because we do have a bit of committee business we want to do. So if we could extend, we'll continue on with questions for now.
Great.
Okay, agreed. Thank you. Okay, now we'll go on to Madam Gill for 2.5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's a two-part question. I have noted on the North Coast, over where I am, that there's been a lot of communication difficulties. That was brought up by Mr. Bragdon, I believe, a little earlier, such that on the one hand, there have been some requests to put off the fishing season because people are worried about catching COVID-19, especially in isolated places where they're seeing these fishing boats possibly coming in, finding it difficult to think of housing the fishers. Same for the Indigenous community. So to put off the fishing season for health and safety reasons, even if this is a Quebec and provincial matter, given the fishing zones, the fact that people are moving around from one place to another, people coming from New Brunswick and going up to the north coast along Quebec, for example, it's been difficult to manage this, you see, interprovincially. So I'm not sure whether there's been any improvement, some improvement that DFO has thought up to ensure that small communities where I am that are already under so much economic and social stress won't be under even more stress. First Nations, for example, in eastern Quebec and remote communities of the lower North Coast.
Sylvie?
Oui, merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. For now, we haven't established any new measures for communications, but this is a good point. We are very aware that in remote communities, especially the First Nation, the risks are much higher and the impacts of the pandemic are much higher as well. So we'll work on that. Thank you.
Est-ce qu'il y a des raisons pour lesquelles...
Are there any reasons why there was no directions, health directions for these communities to help them, communications to help them? I know that concerning the first small boat port, so we worked with the authorities, the port authorities, to give them signs and communications to use to make sure that these ports were given access to people that were authorized with First Nations. So we are regularly communicating with them and to collect the information and their need, but we also want to share with them the various information from the various departments that they can have access to have this information. Do I have more time, Mr. Chair?
Thank you for that. I have to intervene a little bit and apologize to one of my colleagues who I jumped over in the 5-minute round, and that would be Mr. Morrissey. So, for the extended time, I've calculated it to be a half hour, so we will stop at 7 p.m. my time, which would, of course, change all across the country. So we'll extend by half an hour. Mr. Morrissey, I'll go back to you for your 5 minutes, sir. I do apologize. Whenever you're ready, 5 minutes or less.
Well, thank you, Chair. And before my question, I'm pleased to hear the Conservatives advocating for the liberalization of the EI program. But my question is regarding in Prince Edward Island. We're unique in that we have a wild oyster fishery, and it's unique to Prince Edward Island. I believe it's the only one that's licensed by a DFO in their harvest. There's a bit of confusion on how they will be impacted by the relief program that was announced by the minister. So if the department could respond to me or respond in a written question, would be a written answer would be great. But are you aware of the unique character of the wild oyster fishery on Prince Edward Island, which comes under the licensing control of DFO? And will those fishers have the same ability, whether in partnerships or the license holder or the leaseholders, which is unique to this fishery, be able to participate in the fishery package the same as other fishers?
I saw reports on that confusion just, I think, yesterday, Mr. Chair. We believe on the face of it that they should be eligible for these programs, but we can double check to make sure that there's no specific impediment to them because of this unique nature of this fishery. But as a licensed fishery, which would be a part of the Fisheries EI system, we would expect them to be fully eligible, but we'll make sure and we'll provide a written response to the committee, Mr. Chair.
Just for further clarification, some have license, but some hold a lease, which is still the wild harvest regulated by DFO. So if you could be clear to me on that, and some of them participate in a partnership. My other question is in two areas. How is DFO being impacted by COVID-19 as it relates to enforcement and protection out within the fishery? Is it impacting your ability to continue to provide protection and enforcement levels as it was prior to COVID-19?
So during COVID-19, we have been on the conservation and protection side, been delivering our services to 100%, if not in some areas, maybe 80 or 90% of pre-COVID. All of our fisheries officers have been issued standard operating protocols, both from a fisheries officer perspective, but also with specifics to whether they're conducting port inspections, at sea inspections, whether they're boarding foreign vessels for inspections, whether they're doing aerial surveillance.
So I understand then that the protection personnel are in the field basically the same as it was prior to COVID-19?
That's correct.
My other question then would be in the area of small craft harbors and the ability of technical people to get out on site at various harbor locations. Have they been impacted by COVID-19, their ability to get out and continue to ensure that small craft harbors are kept up and these programs are moving forward?
They have, for the most part. We've seen with respect to some construction projects in Ontario and Quebec that there have been delays due to provincial regulations around construction, but those have now been lifted. And we've had a few issues in Newfoundland and Labrador around the availability of construction workers, but by and large, all the harbors have been able to operate as per usual.
And Mr. Chair, how's my time? One. I want to go back to a question that was raised by either my colleagues in the Conservative Party or the New Democratic Party. And one of the answers was, I believe I heard it maybe months before it's clear on who would be eligible under the fishery incentive programs that were announced. Could somebody speak to that and narrow up? I believe I heard not too distant future, but if you're an oyster fisher with no fishery, because we've been shut down totally for over a month, quite frankly, that's not a good enough answer.
So when it comes to who we expect to be eligible, for the fish harvester benefit, the groups that will be eligible will be the license holder, the owner-operators of the inshore fleet, as well as the shareholders that make up another 6,000 members of the crews.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Deputy, I'm aware of that. It's the timeline on which they will begin to take a look at the applications. So it's only when they have access to the applications that the industry will have some comfort that they know what they're looking at and when it'll move forward.
I'm sorry, we're completely gone over time a little bit, dear Mr. Morrissey and Mr. Forgeron, for response. Perhaps you could supply that response in written notice. It'd be appreciated. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. My question is pointed at the COVID recovery and response plan, and I'm focusing on the wild salmon emergency. Can you tell me, has there been any delays in the government's plan to transition from open net salmon farms to closed containment?
That is, Mr. Chair, that's one of the mandate commitments of our minister. We are planning on supporting the minister and meeting all of her mandate commitments over the course of this mandate. And that is still our intention to have a responsible plan regarding the transition of open net aquaculture in British Columbia as per the schedule in her mandate letter.
So I'm going to, just because I only have 2.5 minutes, Big Bar. I'm glad Mr. Fast raised it because we're hearing from Indigenous communities that obviously there were stipulations in the contract to hire Indigenous people that are living adjacent and on the lands where this project's being developed. What enforcement mechanisms has the department had to make sure Indigenous people are hired? Kiewit has gone over budget 3 times what they initially were awarded the contract. We're hearing from Indigenous people on the ground that they're actually not getting awarded those contracts that were guaranteed to them. Is this because of COVID?
So there is a very structured benefits plan as part of the Kiewit contract, and every time that we have increased the Kiewit contract, we have also looked at those benefit plans, and we're monitoring them very closely. We can certainly follow up if you're hearing those kinds of things. We haven't heard them from a project perspective.
Right, we'd be happy to share that with you. In terms of restoration projects, obviously this is critical right now, especially during the salmon emergency, that we don't lose sight of that. We're hearing from people that are getting denied in Clayoquot, SOMAS, the Fraser, all of these very important organizations like the Coastal Restoration Society that are working in partnership with First Nations and local stakeholders. We've got invasive European green crab, we've got derelict and abandoned fishing gear, plastics, stream reparation that needs to be worked on, and we've got people ready to work in the middle of a COVID crisis that can physically distance and do this work. Can you tell me, are you going to accelerate the funding into those communities as part of the recovery plan so we can get those projects off the ground instead of waiting until next year or the year after?
I'm sorry, Gord, that's all your time. So again, I would ask the witness to provide that answer in writing to the committee. It'd be great. We'll go on now to a 5-minute round for Mr. Calkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. A few weeks ago, I spoke to several guides and outfitters from across our country, including many that guide in our coastal waters. As seasonal industries that often use a contract method instead of payroll, many of these companies were ineligible for any of the support programs put forward by ESDC or finance. And I'm wondering, what has the department been doing to help ensure the survival of these commercial sport fishing ventures?
The department's focus has been dealing with those parts of the fish and seafood community that we are directly in the business of regulating, which is our fish harvesting community. I believe that recreational fishers, fishing businesses are the seasonal businesses that would be falling more under other seasonal businesses that the Department of ISED would be actually looking into responses for as a part of the greater tourism industry.
That's what I thought. However, these very same organizations suffered economically last year due to the restrictions on Chinook retention. That is something that the department directly sets. DFO has extended these restrictions to this year, and now these salmon retention restrictions for 2 years in a row, coupled with COVID-19, will even put greater hardship on the recreational sector, as well as the communities that rely on it for tourism dollars. So has the department done an assessment of the retention restrictions and the COVID-related issues and what the overall cost will be to the sport fishing sector?
Sylvie, do you have any information in response to that question?
I know we've done some economic analysis, so I'd be pleased to follow up with that in writing.
I would welcome that. On April 9th, the Sport Fishing Advisory Board submitted a proposal that would help to address the legitimate Chinook conservation concerns while still allowing retention of hatchery Chinook or wild Chinook that fit in a slot size for those stocks that are not of particular concern. This would be an opportunity for the department to give an olive branch to those businesses that rely on these salmon stocks, and it would create, I think, opportunities for the department to go down a different path and ensuring, all the while ensuring that the salmon stocks, the natural wild salmon stocks, remain viable, and also ensuring that these commercial sport fishing entities remain viable. Have you had a chance to look at the Sport Fishing Advisory Board's recommendations, and do you have any thoughts on them?
Yes, we have looked at the recommendations, and we've also been engaging on a fairly regular basis with the SFAB, both at a headquarters and Pacific regional level. We're currently pulling together all the results of our consultations on what the Chinook measures will look like for 2020, and certainly we'll be taking that proposal into account.
The government is currently spending money much faster than any government in history. I'm not saying this as a criticism. This is just the times that we're in. Has the department seized this opportunity to purchase equipment or to do other projects like upgrade hatcheries, purchase marking equipment so that all hatchery-raised fish could be marked, so that we could pursue marked selected fisheries in the future?
So we did receive some funding in 2018 to raise our hatchery capacity, and we are currently as well looking at how we could put in place increased marked selective fisheries. Again, that's all going to be coming forward in the plan for the 2020 Chinook measures.
Thank you. COVID-19 has compounded many existing socioeconomic problems that the recreational angling community is experiencing. But there's also some, I would guess, work coming out of universities and others who are studying the effect that pinnipeds are having on predation of juvenile salmon stocks, particularly coho, Chinook, and some of the others that might not necessarily be a target of pinnipeds, but seemingly with the increase in numbers that we have of the pinniped population, sometimes a tenfold increase in populations from a few years ago. Is the department prepared now, based on these findings that the universities are having, as well as the reports that this committee has overwhelmingly endorsed unanimously, to deal with an increasing pinniped problem and the predation that they have on salmon stocks?
So last year we...
Thank you, Mr. Calkins. We're gone over time. I would ask the witness if they could provide the answer to that question in writing to the committee, please, at their earliest convenience. We'll now go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less, please.
Alors, bonjour, merci d'être parmi.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you very much. I would like to really also say hello to all the representative of the industry, whether they are fish harvesters or the workers, the processor, and also association of harvesters. And it's a difficult situation. My father has been a fisher all his life, and we've seen ups and downs. But with the programs that have been announced right now have been very well received by the industry. Maybe we need some more clarification. I know that we don't have all the details yet, but some questions. The new person arriving, for instance, a youth that decides to buy the lobster license from his father. So the 75% of the program of 75% that we have launched. Have you thought that these young, new arriving people there will not be able to compare with former income years? And so this might be an issue to make sure they will be eligible for the program. So have you thought about the new staff, whether somebody has bought a crab or a lobster license? Because we are speaking about a license that has a great value. It's $1 million. So have you thought about these new workers in this field to make sure that they can qualify to get the 75% or the 10,000 benefit?
That question, other than to say that the representative of the harvester communities, as well as our provincial counterparts, have raised that issue as an issue of concern for the new entrants into the fisheries, and that they don't have that history to make them eligible for these programs, though they have the same expenses and as those who are long-time participants. And we'll be looking at that issue.
Parfait, merci.
Thank you. Well, maybe in the same field, as I said, my father has been a fish harvester all his life with also his brother. So you have a lot of families, relatives who work together, who, cousins. Have you thought also about this issue when you have family relationships there? And for some programs, if you have the same people from the same family in terms of EI, or they cannot really benefit from that. So have you also looked at sometimes the relatives or family links that would prevent some to be eligible for some programs because of their family relationship?
The two new programs that we are launching, DFO, the benefit program and the grant program, there are no family relation issues that we conceive being an issue for those two programs.
Parfait, merci.
Thank you. Another question that I find really worry. I see every morning crab and lobster harvesters that I see going at sea every morning. But for the shrimp, then I don't see that many people going out to fish. So as you know, there's been really a major issue with the shrimp harvesting. There is almost no market. It's not a new problem this year, but it's even worse this year. They don't know when they're going to go out. The programs that have been announced, I think, have been good programs in terms of the fishery programs. But for the shrimp industry, what do we do if there are no fisheries of shrimps? What do we do? Do you have some members of this sector to make sure that the programs will also be adapted to the shrimp industry? But I also believe that provinces have to be sitting around the table to set up some other form of funding than the one coming from the federal government. I think provinces will have to participate. For instance, the New Brunswick province until now has not spent any money. The Conservative government there has not spent any money in various fisheries enterprises. So have you thought about the shrimp industry that will really be meeting many, many difficulties this year if there is no fishery and no harvesting of shrimps this year? And what do we do? How can we help them? Yes, some programs have been put forward, but if there is no harvesting at all, so have you had discussion with the shrimp industry?
Sylvie, do you have any comments of information that the shrimp industry has provided to us? I know they have reached out to us and have talked to us about the issues that they are facing.
Anyone?
One thing I can say right off the top is that we know that as this industry comes off of the employment insurance, it is eligible for CERB, and it will be. We expect to be eligible for Fisheries EI as a sector. And as I mentioned earlier, the details of that will be done by ESDC. The sector I know has also recently reached out to the department, raising a number of its concerns. And I don't, at this point in time, would have to take a look at what they would be asking for in beyond these programs. These programs have been established, be it coming off EI into CERB, into being still eligible for the possibility of the harvester programs. Whether or not you fish this season, eligibility probably will be the same. Similarly for EI.
Thank you, Mr. Fergeron. Unfortunately, that uses up what I suspect will be all of our time for questions and answers with our witnesses. I would like to personally, and I know on behalf of the committee, thank the witnesses for their contribution here today. And I know it's under different circumstances and everybody all into one room. It makes it a little bit harder and sometimes confusing, but I think it went okay once we got on track. And again, thank you for your participation. I know most of you have been before committee before, so again, thank you very much. We'll give just a moment now for our guests to sign off before we continue on with committee business.
Mr. Chair, if I may, are we able to submit questions to these witnesses afterwards? We have a full list of questions we haven't gotten through yet because of the delays. So are we able to submit some questions to be answered by the officials as part of this?
Yes, I would suggest any member that has any questions that we didn't get to would submit those questions to the clerk, who would forward them to the witnesses. And I'm sure they'll be only too glad to respond in writing. Thank you for that, Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Fast.
I'm assuming that our committee business is going to be done in camera. Is that right?
It's all in public.
Good. I just wanted to make sure that my notice of motion is dealt with.
Right, and it will be. As soon as
Thank
we
you.
get the, so we'll,
Mr. Chair, we officially will sign off at this moment. Is that okay, Mr. Chair?
yes, yes,
Okay, thank
yeah,
you.
please,
Thank you for everything.
Okay, I think everybody that was a witness has signed off. Just a couple of things I want to report on, I guess, is that we've heard back from the Minister on her availability to appear before committee. The Minister has told us that she would be available for 2 hours on June 9th to come and talk about Big Bear. And she would be available again for 2 hours on June 10th to come in and discuss COVID-19. So just wanted to let the committee know that. So that will be our 2 meetings next week, will be both attended by the Minister on those 2 topics. As well, for witnesses for the study that we just started, for more witnesses than just the officials, I guess, deadline to submit those witness names is 5 p.m. tomorrow. And some people may say that's a little bit quick, but the reason why we had troubles today was because of the shortness to get witnesses lined up and get them equipped properly to do this from where they are versus coming to where we are caused some problems. So we want to make sure staff and the clerk and everybody got time to get those witnesses lined up and prepared for the equipment they need to make sure the back and forth goes okay and we don't lose time again in the future, hopefully. So that's it from me, Mr. Fest.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And in the spirit of the eagerness that our committee members have demonstrated in bringing forward issues for study at committee, I want to join the bandwagon by highlighting the shrimp by trawl industry on the west coast of Canada. This industry is pulling its hair out trying to get the attention of DFO and to no avail. So my notice of motion reads as follows: that the committee undertake a study of at least 2 2-hour meetings to investigate DFO's management of the shrimp by trawl industry on the west coast of Canada, that the committee hear from industry stakeholders at the first 2-hour televised meeting, and that the committee invite DFO officials to appear at a second 2-hour televised meeting of the committee to provide up-to-date information and respond to concerns raised by industry stakeholders over the government's management of the shrimp by trawl fishery, and also answer questions from members at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Fast. So are you putting that on notice of motion or are you actually making the motion?
No, I'm putting it a notice of motion for the time being.
Okay. All right. I misunderstood earlier. Thank you for that. So I guess that will be up for discussion at a later date, whereas it's only a notice of motion. So it won't be voted on, of course, today. Is there any further committee business? Hearing none. I'll thank. Go ahead, Nancy, clerk.
May I ask, Mr. Chair, so we do have confirmation of the minister for next week, and I would appreciate if I can have directions on what the committee plans on doing the meeting after that.
Okay, so what would be the date?
So it would be the week of
16th. Okay, so June 16th.
16th and the 17th.
16th and 17th. Okay, well, I think that's why we want this witnesses by 5 p.m. tomorrow, isn't it, to continue on with COVID-19
If it is the will of the committee to continue with witnesses on this particular study, that would be great, but I would like to have a specific directions from the committee or the chair.
Okay, do I hear anybody wanting? Mel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was actually on another issue that I'll let this carry on for now. But I do have something else before you adjourn.
Okay, no problem. Mr. Johns.
Yeah, just to clarify then, so we are going to have the minister here Tuesday, June 9th and Wednesday, June 10th. And then we're going to continue studying COVID response on June 16th and 17th. And clarity here again is that we are going to give you a list of witnesses for tomorrow by 5 p.m. Eastern time or?
Okay. Yes.
You're pretty good.
5 p.m. Eastern time.
You're saying good that we can go to 5 p.m. Pacific time, I think so. That's great.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'll be asleep by then.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got that resolved and we'll continue on with the COVID on the 16th and on the 17th.
I believe Mr. Arnold.
Mr. Arnold, you had something you wanted to raise?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to suggest that the committee, once we've had these meetings on COVID with the minister and on the 16th and 17th, that we then start looking at the previous committees or previous studies that we had already started to bring in witnesses on those, continue with some of these other studies, or at least the one that we had started on the West Coast salmon. Very relevant, I think, that we carry on with the study of that. So I would like to just promote that with the rest of the committee, that we start to alternate between meetings, between COVID and the West Coast salmon study.
Okay, no problem. We'll make a note of that, and I'm sure we'll manage to get through it along the way. Before I adjourn, I guess I would like to remind members, please try and get on early before the committee meeting actually before the start time. It gives the clerk and the interpretation and the technical people the opportunity to test the sound when anybody is joining very close to the start time. It makes it difficult to do that and to do it with any sort of satisfaction or confidence because we're anxious to get the meeting started. We're chewing up. We'll lose time doing the committee business if people signed on a few minutes early. It'd make it that much easier to start on time and get through what we want to get through on any given meeting. So I just ask for everybody's indulgence and cooperation on that. And if there's nothing else, I'll adjourn the meeting. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.